The spring of 1945 brought an unusual warmth to the German countryside near Nuremberg. After years of brutal warfare that had torn Europe apart, the advancing American forces were discovering the true horror of what the Nazi regime had left behind. Among the rolling hills and damaged villages, Sergeant Michael "Mickey" O'Brien of the 45th Infantry Division found himself in charge of a most unexpected situation. Mickey had been a prisoner of war for 8 long months. Captured during the Battle of the Bulge in December 1944, he had endured the harsh winter in Stalag 7th, a prisoner of war camp that housed thousands of Allied soldiers. The camp conditions were terrible beyond description. Food was scarce, consisting mainly of thin soup made from potato peels and the occasional piece of black bread that tasted more like sawdust than anything edible. The barracks were overcrowded, with men sleeping on wooden bunks stacked 3 high, sharing thin blankets that provided little warmth against the bitter German winter. The prisoners had learned to survive through small acts of kindness toward each other. They shared their meager rations, took turns keeping watch while others slept, and told stories of home to keep their spirits alive. Mickey, a former plumber from Chicago, had become something of a leader among his fellow prisoners. His practical skills and calm demeanor under pressure made other soldiers look to him for guidance and hope. But everything changed on April 29, 1945, when the sound of American tanks could be heard rumbling in the distance. The German guards had been growing increasingly nervous for days, and many had simply abandoned their posts during the night. When the first American Sherman tank broke through the camp's main gate, the prisoners could hardly believe their eyes. Freedom had finally arrived. Colonel James Patterson, the commanding officer of the liberating force, was a career military man who had seen his share of difficult situations. But nothing had prepared him for what he found at the prisoner of war camp and in the surrounding German villages. The camp itself was overcrowded and unsanitary, with thousands of Allied prisoners in desperate need of medical attention, proper food, and basic human dignity. What struck Colonel Patterson most was the condition of the local German population. As his forces secured the area, they encountered hundreds of German civilians who were in equally desperate circumstances. The war had taken everything from these people. Many of the men had been killed in battle or were still fighting on distant fronts. The women, children, and elderly people who remained had been living in conditions that were hardly better than those in the prisoner of war camp. Among these civilians was Greta Hoffmann, a 34-year-old mother of 3 young children. Her husband Hans had been drafted into the Wehrmacht in 1943 and had not been heard from since the previous autumn. Greta lived in a small farmhouse about 2 miles from the prison camp with her children, Anna, age 12, Klaus, age 9, and little Emma, who was only 5 years old. The farmhouse had been damaged by artillery fire several weeks earlier, leaving holes in the roof and broken windows that let in the cold spring air. Greta had been trying to keep her family alive on whatever food she could find or grow in their small garden. The children were thin and pale, their clothes patched and repatched until they were more patched than original fabric. Like many German women in the area, Greta had not had access to proper washing facilities for months. The local water supply had been damaged by bombing, and soap had become impossible to find. Personal hygiene had become a luxury that few could afford. When Mickey O'Brien and his fellow former prisoners were given temporary assignments to help with the relief efforts, they were shocked by what they saw in the local villages. These American soldiers, who had themselves suffered terribly as prisoners, found themselves face to face with German civilians who were clearly suffering just as much. It was a complex situation that challenged everything they thought they knew about their former captors. Mickey was assigned to work with a medical unit that was trying to assess the health needs of both the liberated prisoners and the local civilian population. Dr. Sarah Collins, an Army nurse who had arrived with the Liberation Force, was overwhelmed by the scale of human need she encountered. She had expected to treat the American prisoners, but the condition of the German civilians presented an equally urgent humanitarian crisis. Dr. Collins was a practical woman from rural Nebraska who had joined the Army Medical Corps because she believed in helping people, regardless of their nationality. She had treated wounded American soldiers in field hospitals across Europe, but the situation she found near Nuremberg was unlike anything she had experienced. The lack of basic sanitation was creating conditions that could easily lead to disease outbreaks that would affect everyone in the area, both American forces and German civilians alike. During her initial assessments, Dr. Collins noticed that many of the German women and children had not been able to bathe properly in weeks or even months. Their hair was matted and dirty, their skin showed signs of various infections, and their clothes were so soiled that they posed a health risk. The situation was particularly difficult for the women, who had been trying to maintain their dignity and care for their children under impossible circumstances. Mickey found himself particularly moved by the plight of Greta Hoffmann and her children. When he first met them during a house-to-house assessment, he was struck by how hard Greta was trying to maintain a sense of normalcy for her children despite their desperate circumstances. She had swept the floors of their damaged home and arranged their few possessions as neatly as possible. The children, though thin and scared, were clean as their mother could manage, and they stayed close to her with the trust that children show toward a parent who is doing everything possible to protect them. Greta spoke some English, learned from a teacher before the war, and she was able to communicate with Mickey about her family's needs. She explained that the local well had been contaminated by debris from bombing, and the nearest clean water source was over 3 miles away. Carrying water that distance with 3 young children was nearly impossible, especially when she also needed to search for food and try to repair the damage to their home. The language barrier between the Americans and the German civilians created additional challenges. Most of the American soldiers spoke no German, and few of the German civilians could speak English. Simple communication about basic needs became complicated and misunderstandings were common. Some American soldiers were suspicious of the German civilians, wondering if they might be hiding weapons or information. Some German civilians were terrified of the American soldiers, having been told stories about how they would be treated if the Americans won the war. Mickey, however, found that basic human kindness could bridge many communication barriers. When he saw Greta's children playing with improvised toys made from scraps of wood and cloth, he was reminded of his own childhood in Chicago during the Great Depression. His family had also struggled to make ends meet, and he remembered how small acts of kindness from neighbors and strangers had made a huge difference in their lives. Colonel Patterson was facing a complex command decision. His primary responsibility was to care for the liberated American prisoners and secure the area for further military operations. However, the humanitarian crisis among the German civilian population could not be ignored. Disease and malnutrition among the civilians could easily spread to his own forces, and leaving people in such desperate conditions went against everything he believed about basic human decency. The colonel called a meeting with his senior officers and medical staff to discuss the situation. Dr. Collins presented her assessment of the health conditions in the area, emphasizing that immediate action was needed to prevent disease outbreaks. She had identified several cases of dysentery among both the American prisoners and German civilians, and the lack of proper sanitation was making the situation worse by the day. Mickey O'Brien, despite being a former prisoner rather than a regular member of the command structure, was invited to the meeting because of his knowledge of local conditions and his practical skills. He had been spending time in the villages, talking to the civilians and assessing their needs. His report painted a picture of desperate people who were not enemies, but simply human beings trying to survive in the aftermath of a terrible war. The discussion in Colonel Patterson's tent was intense. Some officers argued that their resources should be focused entirely on American personnel and that helping German civilians was not their responsibility. Others pointed out that the humanitarian situation was so severe that ignoring it could create larger problems for everyone in the area. The medical staff supported Dr. Collins's assessment that disease prevention required addressing sanitation issues throughout the entire area, not just among American forces. During the meeting, Mickey made a suggestion that surprised everyone present. He proposed that the American forces organize a large-scale washing and sanitation effort that would benefit both the liberated prisoners and the German civilians. His idea was based on his practical experience as a plumber and his understanding of basic public health principles. He argued that such an effort would not only address immediate health concerns, but also demonstrate American values of human dignity and compassion. The former prisoners who had been working with Mickey supported his proposal enthusiastically. Many of them had been moved by what they had seen in the German villages and wanted to help. Corporal Tommy Martinez from San Antonio explained that helping the German civilians made him feel more human after months of being treated as something less than human in the prison camp. Private First Class David Johnson from Minnesota added that organizing such an effort would give the former prisoners a sense of purpose and accomplishment that would help them begin to recover from their own traumatic experiences. Dr. Collins strongly endorsed Mickey's proposal from a medical standpoint. She explained that providing proper washing facilities and clean water would dramatically reduce the risk of disease outbreaks that could affect everyone in the area. She also noted that many of the German women were suffering from infections and skin conditions that could be easily treated with proper hygiene and basic medical care. Colonel Patterson listened carefully to all the arguments presented in the meeting. He was a man who had learned to make difficult decisions quickly, but this situation required careful consideration of multiple factors. He had to balance his military responsibilities with humanitarian concerns, consider the safety and morale of his own forces, and think about the broader implications of any action he might take. As the meeting concluded, Colonel Patterson announced his decision. The American forces would organize a comprehensive sanitation and hygiene effort that would serve both liberated prisoners and German civilians. The operation would be voluntary for all participants and would be conducted with full respect for human dignity and cultural sensitivities. Mickey O'Brien would be placed in charge of organizing the practical aspects of the effort, working closely with Dr. Collins and her medical team. The announcement of this decision spread quickly through both the American forces and the German civilian population. Reactions were mixed on both sides. Some American soldiers were enthusiastic about the opportunity to do something positive after the horrors they had experienced during the war. Others were skeptical about helping people they had been fighting against for years. Among the German civilians, some were grateful for any help they could receive, while others were suspicious of American motives or embarrassed about accepting assistance from their former enemies. Greta Hoffman heard about the planned washing facilities through her neighbor, Frau Weber, an elderly woman who had managed to maintain her dignity despite losing her home to bombing several weeks earlier. Frau Weber had been present when Mickey and Dr. Collins visited their neighborhood to explain the program and answer questions. She told Greta that the Americans were planning to set up bathing areas where people could wash properly with soap and clean water for the first time in months. The reaction among the German women was complicated. Many of them desperately needed access to proper washing facilities, but the idea of accepting help from American soldiers created complex emotions. They had been taught to view Americans as enemies, yet they found themselves in desperate need of exactly the kind of help that was being offered. Some worried about what might be expected in return for such assistance, while others wondered if accepting help might somehow compromise their loyalty to their missing husbands and family members. As word of the planned operation spread throughout the area, both American and German communities began to prepare for what would prove to be an unprecedented demonstration of humanity in the midst of war's aftermath. The stage was set for an event that would challenge assumptions on both sides and create lasting memories for everyone involved. The logistics of organizing such an operation were enormous. Mickey found himself working with a team of engineers, medical personnel, and supply officers to plan every aspect of the effort. They needed to identify suitable locations for washing facilities, arrange for adequate supplies of soap and clean water, provide privacy and security for the participants, and ensure that the operation could be conducted safely and efficiently. The engineers identified several locations where temporary washing facilities could be established. These included a damaged but still functional bathhouse in the town center, several large buildings that could be converted to washing areas, and open areas where temporary facilities could be constructed. Each location would need to be cleaned, equipped with proper drainage, and arranged to provide privacy and dignity for the people using them. Supply officers worked to locate adequate amounts of soap, towels, and other necessary items. Much of this had to be requisitioned from military supplies intended for American forces, which required approval from higher command levels. The medical team prepared to provide basic health screenings and treatments for conditions that proper hygiene might help address. Security arrangements were particularly important given the sensitive nature of the operation. American guards would need to provide protection and ensure order without being intrusive or intimidating. Cultural and language barriers had to be considered in planning every aspect of the operation. The goal was to create an environment where both former prisoners and German civilians would feel safe and comfortable participating. As the preparations continued, Mickey found himself thinking about what this operation might mean for everyone involved. For the liberated American prisoners, it represented an opportunity to regain their own dignity while helping others in need. For the German civilians, it offered not just practical assistance, but also a chance to see Americans as human beings rather than as conquerors or enemies. The complexity of human nature in wartime was becoming clear to everyone involved in the planning. People who had been enemies could find common ground in basic human needs and compassion. The act of providing something as simple as an opportunity to wash properly was revealing itself to be much more than just a matter of hygiene. It was becoming a statement about what kind of people they all wanted to be as the war finally came to an end. The morning of May 3, 1945, dawned clear and warm, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of spring flowers across the German countryside. Mickey O'Brien stood outside the converted bathhouse in the center of town, checking his preparation list one final time. After 4 days of intense planning and preparation, the day had arrived for what would become one of the most unusual humanitarian operations of the war. The old German bathhouse had been built in the 1920s as a public facility for the town. Before the war, it had been a gathering place where families would come on weekends to bathe and socialize. The building featured separate entrances for men and women, individual bathing rooms, and a large central area where people could dry their clothes and visit with neighbors. Bombing damage had broken most of the windows and damaged part of the roof, but the basic structure remained sound, and the plumbing system could still function with some repairs. Mickey's team of former prisoners and American engineers had worked around the clock to restore the facility. Private First Class David Johnson, who had been a carpenter before the war, led the effort to repair the damaged roof and install temporary coverings over broken windows. Corporal Tommy Martinez, drawing on his experience working in his family's restaurant, organized the system for heating water in large metal containers salvaged from the prison camp kitchen. The transformation was remarkable. What had been a damaged, abandoned building was now a clean, functional facility equipped with everything needed for proper bathing. The Americans had installed new pipes to bring clean water from a well they had tested and treated. Large metal drums served as water heaters fired by wood-burning stoves that former prisoners had repaired and positioned for maximum efficiency. Fresh soap, towels, and even some basic clothing had been gathered from various military supplies and civilian sources. Dr. Sarah Collins had spent the early morning hours setting up a medical station adjacent to the bathhouse. Her team was prepared to provide basic health screenings and treat minor medical conditions that might be discovered during the bathing process. She had also arranged for female medical personnel to assist the German women, understanding that cultural sensitivity would be crucial to the success of the operation. The first German women to arrive were the most desperate cases, mothers with young children who had been living in the most difficult conditions. Greta Hoffmann appeared shortly after sunrise, walking slowly down the main street with her 3 children close beside her. She carried a small bundle containing their cleanest remaining clothes and a few precious personal items she could not bear to leave unguarded at home. Greta's approach to the bathhouse was hesitant and uncertain. She had spent much of the previous night wondering whether she should participate in the American program. Part of her was deeply grateful for the opportunity to get herself and her children properly clean for the first time in months. Another part of her worried about what accepting help from Americans might mean, especially with her husband's fate still unknown. When Mickey saw Greta approaching with her children, he walked over to greet them with the basic German phrases he had been practicing. His pronunciation was terrible, but his genuine smile and gentle manner made his intentions clear. He knelt down to speak with little Emma, offering her a small piece of chocolate he had saved from his own rations. The gesture broke down some of the formal barriers, and Greta found herself smiling despite her nervousness. Anna, the 12-year-old daughter, served as translator between her mother and Mickey. Her English was surprisingly good for her age, learned from a teacher who had studied in England before the war. Anna explained that her mother was grateful for the opportunity, but was worried about proper procedures and what would be expected of them. Mickey assured them through Anna that the only expectation was that people would treat each other with respect and kindness. The system Mickey had designed was both practical and dignified. German women and children would enter through one entrance, where they would be greeted by female medical personnel and given clean towels and soap. They would then proceed to individual bathing areas where they could wash in privacy. Their clothes would be taken to a separate area, where American soldiers would wash and, if possible, make basic repairs to damaged garments. While people were bathing, they would have access to simple but nutritious food prepared by former prisoners who had volunteered to help with cooking duties. As more German women arrived throughout the morning, the cultural dynamics of the situation became increasingly complex and interesting. Some women arrived in groups, having decided together that participating in the American program was worth overcoming their initial reservations. Others came alone, slipping in quietly, as if hoping to avoid being noticed by their neighbors. A few brought elderly relatives who needed assistance with walking or bathing. Frau Weber, the elderly neighbor who had first told Greta about the program, arrived with her granddaughter Maria, a young woman about 20 years old whose husband had been killed in the fighting around Berlin several weeks earlier. Maria was clearly pregnant, probably in her 6th month, and had been struggling to care for herself while grieving the loss of her husband. The pregnancy had made her situation particularly difficult, as she needed extra nutrition and medical care that had been impossible to obtain. Dr. Collins immediately recognized that Maria needed special attention. She arranged for a private consultation where she could assess the young woman's health and provide advice about caring for herself and her unborn child. Through an interpreter, Dr. Collins explained basic nutrition and hygiene practices that would help ensure a healthy pregnancy. She also provided Maria with some vitamins and supplements from medical supplies, along with information about how to access further medical care as it became available in the area. The process of organizing the bathing operation revealed unexpected connections between the Americans and Germans. Several of the former prisoners discovered that they had skills and experiences that could help the German civilians beyond just providing washing facilities. Corporal Martinez used his restaurant experience to show some of the German women how to prepare nutritious meals from available ingredients, sharing recipes and cooking techniques that could help them feed their families better. Private Johnson found himself working with German men who had returned from the war with carpentry skills, showing them techniques for repairing bomb-damaged homes using salvaged materials. These informal exchanges of practical knowledge created bonds that transcended the formal boundaries between former enemies and helped establish a foundation for cooperation and mutual respect. The bathing process itself was conducted with remarkable efficiency and dignity. American personnel maintained a respectful distance while ensuring that the facility operated safely and smoothly. The German women, initially nervous and uncertain, gradually relaxed as they realized that the Americans were genuinely trying to help without any hidden agenda or expectations of improper behavior. Young Anna Hoffman proved to be particularly helpful as an interpreter, moving between groups of German women and American personnel to facilitate communication. Her natural cheerfulness and quick intelligence made her a favorite among both Americans and Germans. She helped explain procedures, translated questions and concerns, and generally served as a bridge between the two communities. The transformation that occurred as the German women emerged from their baths was remarkable to witness. Women who had entered looking exhausted, dirty, and defeated emerged looking refreshed, clean, and restored to a sense of human dignity. The simple act of being clean had a psychological impact that went far beyond the physical benefits. Many women were seen standing straighter, smiling for the first time in months, and interacting with their children in ways that showed renewed hope and energy. Greta Hoffman's transformation was particularly striking. When she emerged from the bathhouse with her hair clean and neatly arranged, wearing clothes that had been washed and mended, she looked like an entirely different person. The exhausted, worried woman who had entered was replaced by someone who carried herself with quiet dignity and grace. Her children, also clean and wearing repaired clothing, stayed close to her but seemed less fearful and more curious about their surroundings. The American soldiers who witnessed these transformations were deeply moved by what they saw. Many had entered the operation with mixed feelings about helping German civilians, but seeing the immediate positive impact of their efforts created a sense of satisfaction and purpose that many had not experienced since being liberated from prison camp. The simple act of helping other human beings in need provided a form of healing for their own psychological wounds from imprisonment in combat. Sergeant Bill Thompson from Ohio, who had initially been skeptical about the entire operation, found himself deeply affected by watching a German mother help her young son put on clean, mended clothing. The boy's joy at being clean and the mother's grateful smile reminded Thompson of his own family back home and made him realize that basic human experiences transcended national boundaries and political conflicts. As the day progressed, an unexpected development occurred that added another dimension to the operation. Several German women began volunteering to help with various aspects of the process, working alongside American personnel to assist other civilians. Greta Hoffman, feeling restored by her own experience, offered to help organize clothes and distribute clean garments to other families. Her organizational skills and knowledge of local families made her particularly valuable in matching available clothing to people who needed it most. Maria, the pregnant young widow, despite her own difficult circumstances, began helping Dr. Collins with basic medical screenings of children. Her gentle manner and ability to speak German made children more comfortable during medical examinations, and her presence helped reassure other German women about the medical services being offered. The cooperation between Maria and Dr. Collins became an example of how professional skills could bridge cultural and language barriers. The cooking area became another center of international cooperation. Corporal Martinez found himself working with several German women who were skilled cooks, sharing techniques and ingredients to create meals that combined American military rations with traditional German recipes. The result was food that was both nutritious and familiar to the German families, while also introducing the American personnel to new flavors and cooking methods. These informal collaborations created an atmosphere that was unlike anything that had been anticipated when the operation was first planned. Instead of a simple charity effort where Americans provided services to grateful German recipients, the bathhouse had become a community center where people from both sides were working together to address common needs and challenges. The success of the operation created logistical challenges that required constant adaptation and problem-solving. The number of people wanting to participate exceeded initial expectations, requiring Mickey and his team to extend operating hours and arrange for additional supplies. The enthusiasm of German women who wanted to volunteer their time and skills meant that coordination became more complex as language barriers had to be overcome and work assignments had to be organized. Private Johnson found himself supervising a mixed crew of American soldiers and German civilians who were working together to expand the facility and improve its efficiency. Despite limited shared language, the group managed to communicate effectively through demonstration, gestures, and the few words they had in common. The shared focus on practical problem-solving created bonds between people who had been enemies just weeks earlier. By late afternoon, word of the successful operation had spread throughout the surrounding area, and people were arriving from villages several miles away. Families who had heard about the bathing facility and the cooperative atmosphere were making long walks to participate in the program. This created additional challenges for security and supplies, but also demonstrated the scale of need that existed among the civilian population. Colonel Patterson visited the operation during the afternoon to assess its progress and impact. What he found exceeded his expectations in every way. The facility was operating efficiently, serving large numbers of people with dignity and respect. More importantly, the cooperation between American personnel and German civilians was creating exactly the kind of positive relationships that would be needed for long-term stability in the occupied territory. The colonel was particularly impressed by the way former prisoners had taken leadership roles in the operation. Men who had been broken down by months of imprisonment had found new purpose and energy through helping others in need. The psychological benefits for the Americans were proving to be as significant as the physical benefits for the German civilians. As the day drew to a close, Mickey O'Brien found himself reflecting on what had been accomplished. The bathhouse operation had succeeded beyond anyone's expectations. Not just in providing needed services, but in creating a model for how former enemies might work together to rebuild their communities. The simple act of helping people get clean had revealed the common humanity that connected all the participants, regardless of their nationality or recent history. The final hours of the operation were marked by genuine expressions of gratitude from German families and a sense of accomplishment among American personnel. Children who had entered frightened and dirty were leaving clean and smiling. Women who had arrived exhausted and defeated were departing with renewed dignity and hope. The transformation was visible not just in their appearance, but in their posture, their expressions, and their interactions with their children and neighbors. As Greta Hoffman prepared to leave with her children, she approached Mickey with Anna serving as translator. Through her daughter, she expressed gratitude not just for the practical help they had received, but for the kindness and respect they had been shown. She explained that the experience had helped her remember that there were good people in the world who cared about the welfare of others, regardless of political boundaries or recent conflicts. The success of the first day created momentum for expanding the operation, but it also raised questions about sustainability and long-term planning. The immediate impact had been overwhelmingly positive, but Mickey and his team knew that the real test would be whether the cooperation and goodwill they had fostered could be maintained and expanded over time. As the bathhouse closed for the evening, American and German personnel worked together to clean the facility and prepare for the next day's operations. The sight of former enemies working side by side to maintain a facility dedicated to human dignity and health provided a powerful symbol of what might be possible in the difficult work of rebuilding Europe after the war. 3 weeks after the bathhouse operation began, the small German town near Nuremberg had transformed into something no one could have predicted. What started as a simple humanitarian effort to provide bathing facilities had evolved into a comprehensive community rebuilding program that was attracting attention from military commanders throughout the American-occupied zone. Mickey O'Brien found himself in the unexpected position of coordinating what had essentially become a model for post-war reconstruction. His temporary assignment had been extended indefinitely as senior officers recognized the value of what was being accomplished. The former prisoner of war was now working directly with Colonel Patterson and civilian affairs specialists to document and replicate the successes they had achieved. The bathhouse had become the center of a network of activities that addressed multiple aspects of community recovery. What began as a place for people to wash had expanded to include a medical clinic, a food distribution center, a clothing repair workshop, and an informal school where German and American children were learning each other's languages. The facility operated from dawn until dark, serving not just the immediate area, but people who traveled from villages up to 10 miles away. Greta Hoffman had become Mickey's unofficial liaison with the German civilian population. Her natural organizational abilities and growing confidence had made her an essential part of the operation's leadership. She spent her days helping coordinate services for German families, while her children attended the informal school that had developed when American soldiers and German civilians began teaching each other their languages and skills. The relationship between Greta and Mickey had evolved from cautious cooperation to genuine friendship based on mutual respect and shared commitment to helping their community recover. Despite the language barrier, they had developed an effective working relationship that combined her knowledge of local families and their needs with his practical skills and access to American resources. Dr. Sarah Collins had established a permanent medical clinic in connection with the bathhouse facility. Her initial focus on basic hygiene and disease prevention had expanded to include comprehensive health care for the entire community. She was treating everything from malnutrition and minor injuries to providing prenatal care for pregnant women like Maria, who had become one of her regular patients and volunteer assistants. The medical work had revealed the true extent of suffering that existed among the German civilian population. Many families had been dealing with chronic health problems that had gone untreated for months or even years. Children showed signs of malnutrition that would have long-term effects on their development. Adults bore both physical and psychological scars from the trauma of warfare and its aftermath. Maria's pregnancy had progressed successfully under Dr. Collins's care, and she had given birth to a healthy daughter in early June. The birth took place at the medical clinic with Dr. Collins attending, assisted by Greta and 2 other German women who had learned basic medical skills through their volunteer work. The successful delivery and healthy baby provided a powerful symbol of hope and renewal for the entire community. The baby's arrival created an unexpected emotional moment that demonstrated how deeply the relationships between Americans and Germans had developed. American soldiers who had helped build cribs and gather baby supplies found themselves celebrating the birth as if Maria were a member of their own family. The sight of battle-hardened veterans gently holding a newborn baby and marveling at tiny fingers and toes revealed the humanity that had been preserved despite the brutality of war. Mickey had arranged for the baby to receive American medical care and nutrition supplements that would ensure healthy development. When Maria chose to name her daughter Sarah after Dr. Collins, the gesture moved everyone involved and strengthened the bonds between the American and German participants in the community rebuilding effort. The educational activities that had developed spontaneously around the bathhouse were producing remarkable results. Anna Hoffman had become the unofficial head of the Children's Language Exchange Program, teaching German to American soldiers while learning advanced English from native speakers. Her natural ability with languages and her cheerful personality made her popular with both German and American participants. Corporal Martinez had started teaching cooking classes that combined his restaurant experience with traditional German recipes shared by local women. These sessions had become social events that brought together people of all ages and backgrounds. The shared preparation and consumption of food created bonds that transcended cultural and linguistic barriers. Private Johnson's carpentry workshops had evolved into a comprehensive vocational training program. He was teaching both German civilians and American personnel advanced construction techniques that were being used to repair damaged buildings throughout the area. The program had become so successful that requests for similar training were coming from other communities in the region. The success of the various programs had attracted attention from higher levels of the military command structure. Brigadier General Robert Hayes visited the facility in mid-June to assess whether the model could be replicated elsewhere in the American occupation zone. General Hayes was a career officer who had served in multiple combat theaters, but he had never seen anything quite like what had been achieved at the bathhouse facility. General Hayes interviewed participants from both American and German sides to understand how the cooperation had developed and what factors had contributed to its success. He was particularly interested in how former prisoners of war had taken leadership roles in humanitarian work and how their experiences had prepared them for this type of assignment. Mickey's interview with General Hayes provided an opportunity to reflect on what had been accomplished and what lessons might be applicable elsewhere. Mickey explained that the key factor in their success had been treating everyone involved as human beings deserving of dignity and respect, regardless of their nationality or recent history. The focus on practical problem-solving and mutual benefit had allowed people to work together despite language barriers and cultural differences. Greta's interview, conducted with Anna serving as translator, provided the German perspective on what had made the cooperation successful. She emphasized that the Americans had approached the community as partners rather than as conquerors, asking for local knowledge and input rather than simply imposing their own solutions. The willingness of Americans to learn from German experience and expertise had created a sense of mutual respect that made collaboration possible. Dr. Collins briefed General Hayes on the medical aspects of the program, emphasizing how community-based healthcare had proved more effective than traditional military medical services for addressing civilian needs. The integration of medical care with other community services had created a comprehensive support system that addressed both immediate needs and long-term recovery. The economic impact of the facility had exceeded all expectations. The concentration of services and activities had created informal markets where people traded goods and services. American soldiers were learning traditional German crafts and trading military supplies for handmade items to send home to their families. German civilians were earning small amounts of money by providing services like laundry, cooking, and translation for American personnel. These economic relationships had created a level of interdependence that strengthened the bonds between the two communities. Americans had come to rely on German expertise in local conditions and traditional skills, while Germans had gained access to resources and opportunities that were helping them rebuild their lives. The mutually beneficial nature of these exchanges had created a foundation for long-term cooperation. The facility had also become a center for reuniting separated families. As word spread about the services available, people were arriving to search for missing family members. The Americans had helped establish a message system where people could leave information about missing relatives and check for news from other areas. Several families had been successfully reunited through this informal network. Hans Hoffmann, Greta's husband, arrived unexpectedly in late June after being released from a prisoner of war camp in France. His reunion with his family took place at the bathhouse facility, where Greta had been working when word came that he was approaching the town. The emotional reunion was witnessed by many of the Americans and Germans who had become part of the extended community. and their joy at the family's reunion was shared by everyone present. Hans's return created another opportunity for cultural exchange and cooperation. His experiences as a prisoner of war in Allied camps had given him insights into American perspectives and values that helped him understand and appreciate what his wife and children had experienced during his absence. His mechanical skills, learned before the war, made him valuable in maintaining and improving the bathhouse facility's equipment and infrastructure. The integration of returned German soldiers into the community project required careful handling from both sides. Some American personnel were initially suspicious of former enemy soldiers, while some returned Germans were uncomfortable with the cooperation their families had developed with American forces. However, the practical necessities of community rebuilding and the relationships that had already been established generally overcame these initial tensions. Hans's acceptance into the community was facilitated by his willingness to contribute his skills to projects that benefited everyone. His work on improving the water heating system and repairing damaged plumbing demonstrated his commitment to the shared goals of the community. His grateful recognition of how Americans had helped his family during his absence helped overcome any residual hostility. The psychological benefits of the community rebuilding project were becoming increasingly apparent as time passed. Former American prisoners who had been traumatized by their captivity found healing through helping others and contributing to positive change. The sense of purpose and accomplishment they gained from their volunteer work was proving more effective than traditional military approaches to helping soldiers recover from combat stress. German civilians, who had felt powerless and defeated during the final stages of the war, regained a sense of agency and hope through their participation in rebuilding efforts. The opportunity to contribute skills and knowledge to community projects restored their sense of self-worth and helped them envision a future beyond the immediate survival challenges they had been facing. Children from both American and German families were benefiting enormously from the multicultural environment that had developed around the bathhouse facility. They were learning languages, developing friendships across cultural boundaries, and seeing adults from different backgrounds working together respectfully. These experiences were providing them with perspectives and skills that would serve them well in the post-war world. The documentation of the bathhouse project's success had reached Washington, D.C., where policymakers were studying it as a potential model for occupation policies throughout Europe. The combination of humanitarian assistance, community rebuilding, and cultural exchange was being recognized as more effective than traditional military governance approaches for creating stable, cooperative relationships with occupied populations. Mickey received word in July that he was being recommended for promotion and would be asked to establish similar programs in other locations throughout the American occupation zone. The recognition was gratifying, but he found himself reluctant to leave the community where he had found both purpose and friendship. The relationships he had developed with people like Greta and Hans Hofmann had become genuinely important to him. The success of the project had created momentum for expanding similar efforts throughout the region. Other military units were sending representatives to observe and learn from what had been accomplished. The techniques and approaches that had been developed through trial and error were being systematized and prepared for distribution to other commands. Dr. Collins was being asked to develop training materials for medical personnel who would be working in civilian populations. Her experience in integrating medical care with community rebuilding efforts was proving valuable for planning post-war healthcare systems throughout occupied Germany. The collaborative approach she had developed with German medical personnel was being studied as a model for working with local expertise. As summer progressed, the bathhouse facility had become a symbol of what was possible when former enemies chose cooperation over continued conflict. Visitors from other military units, civilian agencies, and even journalists were coming to see how Americans and Germans were working together to rebuild their community. The story of the Bathhouse Project was being told throughout the American military as an example of how individual initiative and humanitarian values could create positive change even in the most challenging circumstances. For many people, it represented hope that the end of the war might lead to a better world, rather than simply an end to fighting. The long-term impact of the project extended far beyond the immediate community where it took place. Participants on both sides carried the lessons and relationships they had developed into their future lives. American soldiers returned home with a more nuanced understanding of their former enemies and a deeper appreciation for the power of humanitarian action. German civilians had experienced American values in practice and had seen that cooperation and mutual respect were possible between their peoples. The children who had participated in the multicultural educational activities around the bathhouse facility grew up with language skills and cultural understanding that would serve them well in an increasingly connected world. Many maintained friendships and correspondence that lasted for decades, creating personal connections that transcended the political relationships between their countries. The Bathhouse Project had demonstrated that even in the aftermath of total war, human dignity and compassion could triumph over hatred and revenge. The simple act of providing clean water and soap had revealed the common humanity that connected all participants and had created a foundation for lasting peace and cooperation. For Mickey O'Brien, Greta Hoffman, Dr. Collins, and all the others who had participated in the project, the experience had changed their understanding of what was possible when people chose to see each other as human beings rather than as enemies. The memory of what they had accomplished together would remain with them for the rest of their lives, a reminder that even in the darkest circumstances, people could choose hope over despair and cooperation over conflict. The bathhouse had closed as a formal operation by the end of summer 1945, but the community that had formed around it continued to thrive. The relationships, skills, and understanding that had been developed became the foundation for the long process of rebuilding not just buildings and infrastructure, but trust and cooperation between peoples who had been torn apart by war. In the years that followed, many participants would look back on their time at the bathhouse facility as a turning point in their lives, when they learned that former enemies could become friends and that small acts of kindness could have profound and lasting impacts. The story became a reminder that in the aftermath of conflict, the choice between continued hatred and new cooperation ultimately rests with individuals who are willing to see past old divisions to the shared humanity that connects all people.